Okay, my memory card ran out, so I had to switch them out. All right, so we were talking about pressing, and then we were going to talk about clipping seams. So I will go through the pattern when we hit a phase where we need to do some clipping and help you with why and what and where. But basically what you have is you have your concave curves like this right here, and you have your convex curves like this right here. So one of my favorite examples is a heart, because on a heart you have convex and you have concave. So pretty much what you would do on a convex is clip out little pieces of that just along your stitching line. And on a concave, you can literally just cut like that with your scissors to get to the seam line. Now you don't ever want to cut the seam line. That would negate the sewing, and you would have to repair it, and then your piece would be smaller. So this side of this heart would then be made smaller if you were perfect in cutting your convex and your concave curves. And also sometimes there are seam allowances that need to be graded. There are corners that need to be clipped. Every bit of that I will go over as we go through the pattern, so that if you've never sewn or you've never done anything that required the clipping, then you'll be able to see what and why and how it affects the fabric and the fibers and all of that. So now, if there is a sewing term in the sewing instructions, it will be in bold print. For example, if you are told to slip stitch, the word slip stitch will be bold, and then there will be an explanation, like slide the needle through a folded edge, then pick up a thread of an underneath piece of fabric and continue slip stitching in that method. All right, so now we're at the actual putting the bag together. So they are telling us here that they are illustrating the entire instructions in the small size, unless they have to give us instruction in the large size, I imagine, because it will have a different, probably a different method for putting the handle, but that's all speculation, so let's just continue. So they want us to fuse the interfacing to the wrong side of each matching contrast section, and then they're going to tell us what those are. And remember, the dotted that you see is interfacing, right? So for the left front, you're going to stitch one contrast number 3 to the lower front and back panel, 1 to the lower edge of one contrast number 1, upper front and back panel 2. Now that sounds so confusing because they're saying number 3, but they're showing pattern piece number 2 and pattern piece number 1, which is correct, but the contrast is 3, which we know over here, contrast 3 right here, or 4, is pattern piece number 1. So this is where I find it very helpful for new sewers, new makers. If you're not sure what this means, go back, look at your cutting instructions, and then make yourself a note. They're correct. They mean pattern piece number 1, pattern piece number 2, and you're just going to stitch them together, just like they're showing right here. and they are showing us the wrong side of the fabric. So when we stitch this together, we're going to have right sides together, and then when we open it up, piece 2 and piece 1 will be stitched together just like that. And then for the right front, we're going to do the exact same thing, but it's for contrast number 4. So if you look at this, there are 2 pieces of fabric on the right and 2 pieces of fabric on the left. So in theory, this is piece number 2, or pattern piece number 2, and pattern piece number 1, and pattern piece number 2, and pattern piece number 1. Simple as that. And then we're going to pin pattern piece number 2, well, step number 2 and step number 3. We're going to pin them together right here along the inside, and we're going to stitch. But not before we press open these seams. So we'll press these seams, we'll stitch this together. Then we're going to do, we're going to center the wrong side of the front over one front and back buckram, and that's where my warm and natural will come in. And we're going to baste it, and then it's going to say buckram is slightly larger than front to allow for shrinkage. On the outside, spread the seams with your fingers until the stitching is visible, and then stitch on top of the previous stitching line. So we know we're going to be stitching here and here and all the way around, I believe here and here. And what they mean by this is just you want to be able to see your stitch lines. So, just make sure you're able to see where your stitching is. We're going to stitch 1/8 of an inch, and there's a change, from edges of the front. So right there is what they're talking about. That's just 1/8 of an inch from the front section. Then we're going to trim the edges of the buckram even with the front. So we're basically going to make the buckram the same size as our fabric piece. Then we're going to center one fleece over the buckram side. So we have the buckram side and we have the fabric side. Now on this side, the buckram side, we're going to put a piece of fleece. We're going to fuse it into place on top of the buckram or whatever other piece of thing we're using. I'm using Warm and Natural, so I'll probably just put another piece of Warm and Natural. Depending on what I might do Heat and Bond in place of buckram, and then Warm and Natural in place of fleece. And we're going to fuse that in place following the manufacturer's instructions. We'll then trim the edges of the fleece even with the front, so all 3 of those layers will be the exact same size. And then we're going to do the exact same thing to the second layer of fleece on the front in the same manner. And that's not going to make sense until you actually see this project in progress. So once I get to this step, then we'll be able to show you what I'm talking about. So we're going to trim all of those even, and then we're going to do the exact same thing for the back. So exactly the same. I can't show you the back, but the front and the back look the same. So we'll have different pattern numbers, different pattern fabric, and the same set of instructions apply to the back. Then we're going to have these corners. We're going to have anything to show you. Well, it's just best to wait. So anyway, we're going to box the corners, and that would be 4 times. Trim away the corner to within 1/4 of an inch of the stitching, and for size medium they want us to stitch 3 inches, and for size large they want us to stitch 4 inches. So for my particular bag, I will be stitching 3 inches in to make basically a 6-inch boxed corner all the way around, and that's what this is right here. This little section right here, right here, right here is showing us a boxed corner, and it will be the same on both sides. Okay, then we're going to turn our bag right side out and press it, and with the right sides together we're going to fold each pocket in half, and then we're going to stitch leaving an opening, and then we're going to turn the pocket right side out and sew the opening closed. We're going to center one pocket over each front and back lining. This is an interior pocket, so it'll be on the inside lining that we haven't created yet. We're getting there. We're just going to put that pocket in place, and it says to center the pocket on the lining piece. So I don't know if that means that they did or did not include, without looking at the pattern piece, I don't know. Sometimes there will be a faint line where you can kind of determine where the pocket is supposed to go on the pattern piece. So we'll see. Then we're going to use a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance and stitch the lining sections together in the same manner as the bag. The lining is going to be slightly smaller than the bag to compensate for all these layers. That's why we're using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, not a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So we're going to stitch across the bottom, and stitch up. Okay? Then with wrong sides together, we're going to place the lining inside the bag, matching the side seams. And we're going to baste, basically I would baste the upper edges together. I don't think I would go ahead and stitch it just yet. I would just baste it, or clip if you have clover clips or something similar. Now, for medium, size medium, we are going to stitch the ends of our handle together. So piece 6, we're going to stitch it together. And for all sizes, we're going to center the handle fleece within the placement lines. Yeah, so we're just going to fuse the interfacing in place, and then we're going to fuse the fleece, or I did that backwards. We're going to fuse the fleece and then the interfacing, and then we're going to turn down a 1/4 of an inch. So here's where we are. This is the handle that we just stitched together up here, right here. We're going to fuse the fleece, which will be that piece number 7 right there, right in the middle. And then on top of that, and on the wrong side of the handle, we're going to put our piece of interfacing. And then we're going to turn under a 1/4 of an inch on both long edges. Nope, one long edge, right, because we'll be sewing the other one. All right, and then it's telling us we're going to turn in the raw edge, this piece right here that we did not turn under. We're going to turn in the raw long edge of the handle to the inside along the edge of the fleece, and then we're going to turn in the pressed long edge over the top of the raw edge and stitch close to that pressed edge that we already took care of up here, so that we end up with that right there. Alright, so this is what it looks like when we're done with step 23. Now step 24, we're going to take that whole thing and fold it in half, so that we basically end up with half of this width. So we're going to bring this edge down, and we're going to hand stitch close to the pressed edge. Then we're going to cut our loops, and we're going to turn in a 1/4 of an inch on the long edges of each loop, and we're going to press it. And then with the wrong sides together, we're going to fold the loops in half lengthwise, having our edges even, press it, and then stitch, so that we end up with this. So we go from this to this to this. And we're going to need to pin one of each, one end, these would be the ends, this or this. So one end of each loop to the upper edge of our bag. So we're going to have 2 on the front and 2 on the back. And the pressed edge of the loops 2 3/4 of an inch away from the center seam. Then we're going to baste those raw edges together, and for size medium we're going to place the loops 3 1/4 inches from the center seam. Forgot they were doing just the little bag. Okay, we're going to place the handle around the bag and over the loops. So here it is, and it's just sitting right on top of those loops. And then we're going to take the remaining end of the loops over the top of the handle and stitch it or baste all the way around, so that the handle is now encased by the all 4 of those loops. We're not looking at size large. So with wrong sides together, we're going to fold binding in half lengthwise and press. We are then going to, on the outside of the bag, pin the binding to the upper edge of the bag, having the raw edges even, and turning under one end and lapping it over the remaining end, just like this, at one side. So you're going to want to do that over a side seam. It's less visible there. So then we're going to just pick up that binding and we're going to turn it over the top of the seam, and we're going to slip stitch it right there, and just completely slip stitch that whole thing all the way around. It should look like this. And then if you're going to do a silk flower, oh, I see. So the little piece of interfacing would go on the back of the fleece flower, and you're going to glue that to the back of the fleece flower, and then that will give you a place to sew from. You'll be sewing the fleece flower using the fleece instead of the fleece flower. You know what I mean, the silk flower. Okay, and then basically you're done. You're just going to sew the flower in place. You've got the binding on the top of the bag. You've got the handle. To adjust the handle, pull the handle up at the center on both sides for a handbag, or pull the handle up at the center on one side for a shoulder bag. That is the thing I can't wait to see. How does one side make that work? It will be fascinating. Okay, all right. So we've done our walkthrough. We know what we need. I'm going to go over the fabric requirements. So if you want to do McCall's Fashion Accessories K-Wit Design M5598, I will post the picture. I'm going to show you my fabric in case this is your first time visiting. Alright, so these are the fabrics that I chose for the bag I'm making. It is called, I think it's pronounced Mary's. I've been saying Marie's, but there's not an apostrophe S. It's just M-A-R-I-E-S. So I think it's just an unconventional spelling of Mary. Mary's? Marie's? Mary's? I'm not sure. It would Maris? I don't know. In any case, stitch and sparkle, stitch and sparkle, stitch and sparkle, and it's all part of the picnic theme. And as you can see, they're all basically in the same colorway. There's some of the same colors. This particular print has ants, and of course this has the ants. And then this is part of this. Clearly you could see there are ants, there are bees, there are flowers. This is obviously part of this picnic. So what I have not decided is what fabrics I'm going to put where on this bag, like front and back, handle, front and back. I honestly, at this point, I have not decided. So that will be my choice as I'm thinking about it and moving forward. I'm going to have to make a decision on that. And of course there'll be lining and pockets and whatnot. And no flower. I've just decided I'm not doing that flower. Okay, so if you're doing a small, you're going to need 1/4 yard. And that would be for the upper front and back panels. For the contrast 3 and 4, you're going to need, if you're doing a size small, you're going to need 1/4 yard, medium 3/8 yard, large 3/8 yard. Contrast 5, which is the handle and the inside pocket. If it's small, it would be 3/8 yard, medium 1/2 yard, large 1/2 yard. Contrast 6, which is the loops and the binding, you will need for small 1/4 yard, medium 1/4 yard, large 3/8 yard. Contrast 7, which is the lining, for the small you'll need 3/8 yard, medium 1/2 yard, and large 1 1/8 yards. If you're using buckram, for the small you'll need 3/8 yard, medium 1/2 yard, and large 3/4 yard. Fusible fleece for the small would be 7/8 yard, medium is 1 yard, and large is 2 3/8 yards. Fusible interfacing, you will need 7/8 yard for small, medium is 1 yard, and large is 1 3/8 yard. And then the notions are a large silk flower and fabric glue. So that's basically it. The sizes are small. The bag is 11 inches wide by 9.5 inches long. The medium bag is 13 inches wide by 11 inches long. And the large bag is 15 inches wide by 13 inches long. So that's where we are at this particular point. And I will definitely be starting on this bag tomorrow. The rest of the day I am going to be hemming the tablecloth. I have finished it up to that point, so I need to hem it. I will definitely show how it looks. Once it is hemmed, I plan to wash it, dry it, press it, and then put it on the table, and I will let you see the final I will let you see what that looks like at the very end. I mean, I'll bring you on the journey with me so we can all kind of go through that together. Alright, I hope that everyone enjoys the rest of their day. If you stick around for the, I believe it's part 4 and final on the tablecloth, I will see you a little bit later. And if not, we'll be moving forward. Thank you. The second thing is the tablecloth. All of that is gone. So I decided while I was having lunch that what I'm going to do, instead of hauling that huge tablecloth in here and trying to explain with this mass amount of fabric what I did, what I'm doing, where I am, where I was, what I'm going to do is a small replica of the tablecloth and kind of get you up to speed, because I don't know what was on there and I have no way of figuring it out. but I can tell you where I am right now. So, without further ado, okay, now I realize that these two pieces of fabric right here do not match these two pieces. This is what I have to demo with. So, because I don't know where I was in the process when I lost all of that information, I'm just going to demo using this, which is a little bit kind of to scale. So this is the print, this is the solid, this is the print, this is the solid, and this is the print that should match this, but it doesn't. All right, so what we did is we stitched, and this, let's see if I find something that can, so at this particular point, this is the basic tablecloth right here. And I've also done a lot of pressing at this point. So I came along and I clipped in between each intersection, just to the seam line, not through it. Like that. And then I pressed all these seams open. Now on my table, this right here is the center seam. This particular line right here. I pressed, I'm not going to go do this, but I pressed this and this and this and this and this open. So all down through here, I pressed open. Extra fabric away from this line of stitching. So I went down this direction. Now on the massive tablecloth in there, I put my machine in half speed. That really made a big difference. Alright, so here's what the top stitching looks like. And as you can see, this is on this side, this is up here, and then I have two rows. Up, down, down. This one's up here. I mean, it's just it looks like an on-purpose stitch pattern to me, okay? So now it required at this stage a massive pressing. And already you can see that this by itself in this small form is starting to bubble and wrinkle. It's very sharp. I'm not even going to mess around. It's super sharp. This is to help you cut away excess fabric. So I went along and trimmed close to the seam, of course not on the seam or past the seam, just removing extra fabric from the underside of the tablecloth as carefully as I could, and it did take a long time. And in a weird way, it was a very satisfying part of this project to get this extra fabric basically off. And it helps, once I wash it and dry it in the dryer, this will probably stop raveling and unraveling and causing, you know, a headache, because by the time it hits that sewn seam, there just won't be enough fabric left to, you know, to carry on like that. Now, my recommendation when you're using a pair of duckbill scissors, especially if they're very sharp, like this particular pair or set, whatever, is to not. We all have, well, I can't say we all have a habit. I know some people who are super precise in every move they make, but I'm not like that. I was holding these in my hand and just grabbing that big, huge piece of fabric and moving it around. And I finally said, well, I can't do that anymore, so I'm removing them from my hands and then rearranging this massive, huge piece of fabric and then picking these back up to continue, because I could have easily cut a hole, poked a hole, or in some way, in some careless way, I could have damaged the tablecloth that I've spent so many hours working on. And to just be careless with this would have been ridiculous. Anyway, that has all been done, and then it has been squared up. So what I did is I pressed all of this in one direction so that the center seam was right bang on center seam, and I gave it a good press. Just like this. Okay, pretend that we're squared up, even though we all know we're not. Okay, so on the sides, right here, the long sides, I am going to fold up and press down about 1/2 inch because I don't want to lose too much length. And then I'm just going to fold that on top of itself, like that. But I just want all the stitches to be the same, and I want the stitches to be visible. It is a huge tablecloth, and I've pressed it. I haven't just, you know, done it like this without pressing. But this is where that drape is on the rounded oval shape, and my tablecloth drapes to the floor with this point touching the floor. So my plan, I don't think I need the table. I might, but I don't want a whole lot of stuff going on up here. I have my machine in half speed, and I have it in a straight stitch, and I'm going to increase my stitch length from the default 2.0 to a 2.5. So I'm going to be stitching rather slowly, like I was yesterday. And you can lengthen your stitch because this is just the hem, and it doesn't need, it's not like it's holding something together that's under stress. And I'll see you next time. Thank you.